My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be Shakespeare and Cleopatra, Video 24, Cleopatra and Cassandra. This is my novel, Shakespeare and Cleopatra, My Life is Not My Own. And here's a summary of the story. Cleopatra is dead, hovering between life and the afterlife. By some strange process, she becomes aware that a playwright is telling her story. Who is this Shakespeare? What does he know about her? What kind of Cleopatra does he intend to create? He seems to be unaware of her presence, but perhaps if she talks to him as he writes, she can exercise some control over the story of a life that she fears is no longer her own. So that's the summary of my novel. Here is the play that Shakespeare is writing. So Cleopatra is in the room with Shakespeare. She's dead. She's in the afterlife. She finds herself in a room with a person who's alive, sitting at a desk, scribbling on pieces of paper. She will come to know in a few chapters, as you and I know from the start, that this is William Shakespeare, and the play he's writing is Antony and Cleopatra. But even though she comes to know his name, she doesn't know anything about him, so she has no idea whether it's going to be a really terrible play or even a play that mocks her and makes fun of her. So she's very concerned. And since he doesn't acknowledge her or respond, and she thinks, well, about all I can do is talk to him. If I tell him about myself, maybe some of that will come through in this play he's writing. Now, later, after I read a passage from the play, I'm going to talk about this novel. There's a piece of tape across it. I used to be a high school teacher. I'd put my name on it so it didn't get mixed in with student copies because I underline and put stars and margin and so on, the margin. But it's The Great Gatsby. So I'm going to talk about The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald afterwards, so I won't bother holding it up a second time. Now, our dreams make it clear to us that we think in imagery at the deepest levels of our minds. Every art form is an artist's attempt to replicate human experience and the human response to that experience in forms and techniques as applied to a substance. For sculpture, the substance is marble. For visual art, the substance is canvas and paint. And for the novel, the substance is ink and paper. For me, the preferred form for the novel is a poetic novel. And one of the techniques that I use to approximate the human experience is the folk tale as an image in the mind of a main character. The folk tale of Cassandra represents a layer of imagery in the mind of the main character of this novel, Cleopatra. I will read that folk tale, which has one segment in each chapter of thought in the mind of Cleopatra, and then talk about the role of imagery in literature. So, in every chapter of thought in the mind of Cleopatra, there's something about Cassandra that wants to have an influence on all the other thoughts in that chapter of thought. That's the point. Okay, let's look at the folk tale of Cassandra. We go to page 6 for the first one. Here it is. Cassandra was a girl who was a mortal. Now I stress that, not immortal, a mortal. Cassandra was a girl who was a mortal. Page 13, then we go to the next thought in the next chapter. Cassandra was a mortal who was favored by a god. Then we go to page 21. Apollo looked in the mirror. He was first among the gods. He was handsome, intelligent, charming. He was considering a gift for his intended. He was head over heels in love with a mortal girl. Then to page 30. Cassandra would surely be attracted. Apollo was first among the gods. No mortal girl could resist him. He had always had his way. He felt he knew the way to win this girl. Okay, then we go to page 37. Apollo forced a gift upon her. He gave Cassandra a special power. It was the power to know the future. She had never asked a favor. She woke up one morning and knew that her life had changed. Then we go to page 45. Cassandra would toss and turn on her pillow, lie awake until the dawn, didn't want to know the future. Snakes would whisper in her ears. They would tell her every plight that would plague humankind. Then page 54. Cassandra spoke to Apollo. She tried to gently make her case. She would forgo whatever relationship he proposed. She didn't want to know the future, know the patterns of sun and cloud. Please ask the snakes to keep their thoughts to themselves. Okay, now we go to page 64. Apollo was greatly troubled. Apollo was in a bind. He had given the gift of future knowledge. He could not go back on his word. He was determined to not be bested by a mortal girl. From 64 we go to 73. Apollo's lips curled into a smile. Of course he could not take back a power, but he could give another one. He would curse the girl Cassandra. From now on, nothing that she predicted would be believed. From 73, we go to 81. Cassandra could find no receptive ears. If she said the jug would be empty, everyone believed that it would be full. If she said it would rain, they stayed outdoors. They grew angry at her predictions, though never would they believe. Everyone told her they preferred that her lips be sealed. From 81, we go to 89. Here we are. She told them a story of great destruction, of offense to the gods, and of turmoil to those on the earth, of the shiftings of the foundations of the city, of the crumbling of the columns and the beams. She told them that Troy would fall as sure as would fall the rain. From that, we go to page 98. Okay, and I'm going to flip my page here while I'm at it. Okay, page 98 then. What could Cassandra gain, they wondered, by telling such a story? What earthly advantage would spur her to tell such a lie? They applied the deepest wisdom of the moment. They dismissed her story as having no human logic. They dismissed her story as having no value at all. Then to 107. Cassandra told of confusion and distortion, of the killing of a husband and a king, of a pool of blood on a palace floor, of a knife that would pierce the heart of a family. She said that Agamemnon would fall as sure as would fall the sun. And then to 115. What could Cassandra gain, they wondered, by telling such a story? What earthly advantage would spur her to tell such a lie? They applied the deepest wisdom of the moment. They dismissed her story as having no human logic. They dismissed her story as having no value at all. And now to the last two segments of this imagery in the mind of Cleopatra. Cleopatra comparing and contrasting her situation with that of Cassandra. Troy fell. Cassandra had known. Agamemnon fell. Cassandra had known. She lost her city, she lost her family, she lost her life. Only one thing did the snakes not whisper. Only one thing did she yearn to know. Why should such a curse distort and destroy her life? And then the last image here, page 130 of the Cassandra story, in the mind of Cleopatra, is this. What is it then to be mortal? What is it then to live and to breathe? Why this cycle of human suffering? A world in agony? A world in flames? Why does sunshine only last until it rains? Well, as I say, that's the folk story of Cassandra in the mind of Cleopatra, who's comparing it to her own situation by comparison and contrast. They're both mortals. Cleopatra is a queen, Cassandra was a princess, and so on. But there are all kinds of parallels and contrasts that Cleopatra is kind of working out as she lives her present moment life. I've often defined deepening imagery as imagery which is not usually drawn from the surface story of the novel in which it appears. The surface story of this novel, Shakespeare and Cleopatra, My Life is Not My Own, is the interaction of the two characters, Cleopatra and William Shakespeare. The topic of Cassandra has nothing to do, on the surface at least, with the story of William Shakespeare and Cleopatra. Nevertheless, the story of Cassandra occurs to the subconscious mind of the main character, Cleopatra, as an image which just might help her to understand, to interpret the experience through which she's going as she interacts with the writer William Shakespeare. As I said earlier, what I call deepening imagery is imagery which is not often drawn from the information of a surface story, which in this novel is the interaction of the two characters, Shakespeare and Cleopatra. The information of the deepening imagery of the folk tales Cassandra is from an entirely different experience, the story of Cassandra during the Trojan War. I've often thought that one of the best deepening images in all of literature is the image of the Dutch sailors from the novel The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. The surface story of that novel is the story of the quest of the character, the narrator Nick Carraway, to figure out the true nature of the mysterious character J. Gatsby. The surface milieu of that story is that of New York gangsters and Long Island mansions. However, at a certain point in the story, Nick Carraway draws on information that seems at first to be completely unrelated to the milieu of gangsters and mansions and bootleggers and fabulous parties. Let's have a look at that deepening image as found in The Great Gatsby on the last page of that novel. So this is a passage from The Great Gatsby. Most of the big shore places were closed now, and there weren't any lights except the shadowy moving glow of a ferry boat across the sound. And as the moon rose higher, the inessential houses began to melt away, and gradually I became aware of the old island here that flowered once for Dutch sailors' eyes, a fresh green breast of the New World. Its vanished trees, the trees that had made way for Gatsby's house, had once pandered in whispers to the last and greatest of all human dreams. For a transitory enchanted moment, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent, compelled into an aesthetic contemplation he neither understood nor desired, face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate with his capacity for wonder. So, whoops, I'm missing a page here. Now that's Nick Carraway thinking about Gatsby, but thinking in terms of other imagery, non-Gatsby imagery. This image takes the reader, as Nick Carraway is thinking about this image, through a series of considerations. Number one, Nick is looking at Gatsby's empty mansion as the story of his quest for the real Gatsby seems about to come to close. Number 2, Nick draws on information from an historical era, the discovery of an island in the New World by early Dutch sailors who founded a colony which they called New Amsterdam. And number 3, this leads Nick to speculation that these Dutch sailors must have had thoughts and emotions that have occurred to people at various times throughout the history of humankind, and which Nick summarizes in very eloquent words. So he looks at a physical item. He draws on information that has nothing to do with that physical item, and then he speculates about the connection between the two. I've often thought of this as one of the most fascinating images in all of literature because it taught me that a writer can place an image near the end of a surface story that will lift the entire story to a completely different level of potential meaning in the mind of a reader. I'm using the image of lifting, but my point is that this is deepening imagery. It takes the reader deeper into his own mind in terms of the reader's attempt to see potential meaning in the story of the bootlegger, the gangster, the party giver, the mansion owner, Jay Gatsby. There's something about Jay Gatsby that makes the information of a surface story of Jay Gatsby's life insufficient as imagery for the potential understanding of the meaning of Jay Gatsby's life. That's why Nick Carraway resorts to deepening imagery, to imagery that does not draw on the information of the Gatsby life experience. In the same way, we readers are in the position of Nick Carraway. We need to go outside the image quarry of a surface story of the life of Jay Gatsby to consider imagery which will suggest a potential meaning of the life of that mysterious man. How we interpret this imagery, of course, is up to the individual reader. We do not know how Nick Carraway interprets the connection between Gatsby's life and the image of the Dutch sailor's discovery of the green breast of the New World beyond the moment of the sailor's apprehension of the island. So the image is for us a raw or pure image. This allows every reader of this novel, The Great Gatsby, whether consciously or subconsciously, to have an individual interpretation of the deepening image of the Dutch sailors discovering the green breast of the New World and its relationship to the life of Jay Gatsby. So, to return to my original point, the folk tale of Cassandra is an example of the use of the technical device of deepening imagery which is not drawn from the image quarry of the life of the surface story of the lives of the characters of the novel in which the deepening image is being employed. Cleopatra goes outside her own life to find imagery to help interpret her life. So too the image of Cassandra and her situation during the Trojan War, in its parallels and contrasts with the life of Cleopatra, is presented to the reader of this novel to consider. Cleopatra presents it to herself, and in looking over her shoulder, it's presented to the reader of this novel. So, once again, this is my novel, Shakespeare and Cleopatra, My Life Is Not My Own. It's found on Amazon, where there's more information. It's also found on my publisher's website, rocksmillspress.com, where there's more information. On my website, johnpassfield.ca, there's the planning notebook that I wrote as I was planning on writing this novel, and the journal, the reflective journal, which I wrote as I was polishing the novel. And you can access both of those just by going to my website, johnpassfield.ca, and just clicking on the cover of these two books, and you'll get them one by one to read. And lastly, I'll just say thank you for watching this video.